Hello everybody, I'm Mr. Brown, and this is my good friend Patrick Morey. He's here with me today. We're going to be teaching a whole lesson today and trying something a little bit different, trying to go a little bit longer than my normal 5-minute videos, so we want to talk about these things a little bit further. I also have Master Oogway over here, who is, you guys know Master Oogway, he's my other videos, but we're going to let him wander a little bit because he likes to patrol the classroom and make sure there's no ne'er-do-wells. Ne'er-do-wells are all over the place these days. I also have an octopus, but that's probably not necessary, and a chicken. So.
Just really not necessary.
Yeah, we're going from necessary to less necessary to even less necessary.
This is true.
Yes, least. So anyways, today we're going to be talking a little bit about base of power when it comes to children and working with children. I teach relationships class and child development classes and also parenting classes to parents. And so I want to go a little bit longer and go a little bit more in depth with base of power and how that works also. So my good friend Patrick teaches next door over here, as I said, and he's also a parent as well. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about your family?
Sure. So I have 3 beautiful children. I have a freshman, a 6th grader, and a 1st grader. So I have one in elementary, middle, and high school. And 2 of them have spectrum type disorders, and they're very open about it. And hopefully it makes me a better parent to work with them on a daily basis, and hopefully all the kids that I work with in my classroom. I teach high school broadcast journalism.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I know.
I'm also married to the most beautiful woman on the planet. I might be biased.
Awesome. So I haven't told you a little bit about my family yet. So let me tell you what's going on here. I've been married for 27 years now, and my wife and I have 6 children. We do have a couple kids on the spectrum and neurodivergence. We've got autism and ADHD and some more of the neurotypicals also as well. So we got the full spectrum going on here. But today we're going to talk about things that kind of have to do with all children and things that help. So one of the biggest questions is that most parents have is what power do I have to help teach my kids, to help them to learn the stuff that they need to learn? And we're going to talk about 2 different types of power with a base of power here. We're going to be talking about a positive base of power and a negative base of power, or as
the light side and the dark.
Yeah, or as Mr. Morgan and I like to call it, the light side and the dark side. So we're a little bit of Star Wars fans also. So.
I don't know how you could tell.
Yeah. I can't tell that at all. Very good. Also, I forgot about my lightsaber chopsticks here. I had a student who gave these to me today, so in case you need one of these, here's one over here.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
You never know when they're...
It's not working now. I'll have to fix it later. All right, so anyways. All right. So our first thing is... Oh, mine didn't work. For some reason, it wasn't working a second ago. Okay.
User error.
So, good thing we use the red lightsaber also, because we're going to talk about dark side powers first, which has to do with controllers and fear, conditional love, and manipulation. Yes, exactly. Let me get my other ones over here. That'll work. Okay. So, this one works. So, we're on dark side here, so I use the red lightsaber here. So, let's talk just for a second about using fear as a way to control children. I think all parents at some times ends up using this because of oftentimes when we lose our temper or things like that, it oftentimes turns to fear. And the problem with fear is that it oftentimes has negative side effects to it. Anything you want to talk about with fear at all?
Because I'm the parent, and I said so.
Exactly. So
I think, there's no easy way to be a parent. There's going to be times when your kids, as much as you love them and as awesome they are going to be working your last nerve.
Yeah.
And I think this is occasionally something that happens to all parents where you're like, you better do what I'm saying or, you lose all privileges, go to timeout. Whatever the negative consequence might be to get your kid to toe the line.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's not what you want to do all the time.
Yeah.
It's usually a last resort, and it's really not as effective as we hope it would be.
Yeah, and there is a place for fear occasionally. The problem is if you use fear or conditional love or manipulation all the time, and typically we want to stay away from manipulation and conditional love all the time. But if you use them all the time, then they have some pretty serious negative consequences that go along with it.
I've heard that fear leads to anger,
Yes.
and anger leads to hate,
Hate leads to suffering.
and that leads to online streaming. I'm just kidding.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about some of the negative consequences that kind of go along with this. So first of all, one of the things has to do with motivation. For instance, there's extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic is pretty simple. It comes from external things, whereas intrinsic is internal. So any thoughts you have about extrinsic or intrinsic? Like which do we typically want to go with here?
Well, extrinsic would be the fear-based sometimes. Like you're like trying to control them from the outside, where the goal in parenting, and I steal this from a good friend who, if she sees this, knows who she is. The goal of all parents, I think, is to raise people that are functional, and in the words of my friend, that don't suck. Right, and the way that works is they intrinsically are okay with who they are and are looking for positive ways to move their life forward. They're motivated to be better people because they want to be better people, not because someone's forcing them to be better.
Yeah. So, and for those of you who are listening to this and not actually watching this on video, I have some of the slides up here that are kind of changing the way we talk about some of these things here. So the intrinsic motivation, as Patrick was talking about here, comes from an internal desire to succeed. And we typically want kids to have that instead of the extrinsic. Because have you ever seen people who grew up with entirely extrinsic forms of motivation? What tends to happen with them?
Well, the first minute they're on their own, they go a little, like, how do I say this? You ever seen Disney stars that like were so innocent when they were starting off with the Mickey Mouse Club? And then they hit like teenage years and just go bonkers insane? That's usually what happens with your totally extrinsic, because they're guided and they're forced to do things. When they can make their own choices, they go a little crazy and oftentimes will make poor choices just to rebel because from what they've been taught all those years. So you really want intrinsic so that they're making their own decisions early on, and therefore when real adulting comes along, they make more positive life choices.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the biggest problems with using extrinsic motivation like punishments or even rewards, which we'll get to in another podcast. But is that with extrinsic, as soon as the external source is gone, like the parent, then they no longer have that desire to do well, and so they oftentimes don't do as well on their own. So our goal as parents actually is to, in a sense, work ourselves out of a job. We want our kids to be able to eventually not need us to tell them what to do.
Or like training wheels. Eventually they got to kick you off.
Yes, exactly. I mean, hopefully they still want us around, but we won't need that for punishments or anything like that.
I still want you around, Jeff.
Oh, I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
So when all my kids are gone, we'll still be doing Star Wars stuff.
And dorky.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay. So, and then another problem with dark side powers is it oftentimes changes the way kids see themselves. So a controller oftentimes says, and again, I have this on the screen there for those of you who are listening, says, I will love you, I'll give you love, affection, and kindness if you live up to my standards. If you do what I want, then I will show you the love that you need. And so then kids oftentimes it starts changing the way they see themselves also. Any thoughts you have about that?
Well, it's the kind of person that's always seeking affirmation, like we said, extrinsically from outside themselves, is because they've been exposed to this kind of thought mentality in their lives. Like they feel like they don't earn anything on their own, that they have no self-worth on their own, as I guess that would be a good way to say that. They have to like do what the other person says in order to get love and affection. That's why so many, how do I say this tactfully, teenage dating relationships end up in like flaming balls of disaster.
Yes.
Because
Well, you and I have both seen a lot of those kind of relationships. Teaching in high school, there's all kinds of kids who go for people to give them external validation, and they end up with the wrong people. So,
Yeah. Swing and a miss.
so yeah, we want kids to learn that their value does not come from doing certain things or from performing in certain ways or getting certain grades, that their value comes from internally, that they are valuable just in and of themselves. And that gives kids more confidence to actually perform better. And see, the thing is oftentimes this ends up doing the exact opposite we want because it actually decreases performance, which we'll talk about here in a little bit also. So, all right, so this is, so we talked a little bit about fear. This is conditional love, where you say, I'll give love, affection, and kindness if you live up to my standards. So, the other thing is oftentimes parents, without meaning to sometimes, we like to use conditional love as a way to manipulate our kids into feeling like they need to do stuff for us. We may say stuff like, after all I've done for you as a parent, and you're not even going to do the dishes. What's that? That ever sound familiar?
Yeah.
So I think I've done that too also. But what we're oftentimes trying to do is use guilt as a way to motivate them and a form of obligation, that they feel obligated or guilty to do that. So any thoughts on any issues that might cause down the road?
Well, like I said, there's certain times that all parents fall into these traps. I felt with the dishes one. I found the exact one of that where, not exactly those words, but you're part of this family. If you don't want to do the dishes, then I don't want to make dinner.
Well, yeah, and that's okay also. It's good for them to know there's some reciprocity in the family as well. So there's nothing wrong with that, as long as that isn't like the whole way we do that all the time.
Yeah,
So.
that can't be your go-to.
Yeah.
Because then once again it kind of creates codependency at a young age in children.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Like, unhealthy relationships usually use control. They want to control the other individual in the relationship. And this can start with, childhood if you're not careful. Like, they'll get into that mode where you're either trying to control other people or you're setting an example for your kids and then they try to control other people. I don't know. It's just, that's not a healthy way of looking at the world either, of like trying to control those around you in any way. You're not going to form healthy attachments, healthy relationships, ever. And that's sad.
Yeah, I think we've all seen childhood relationships like that, where one tries to guilt the other person into doing stuff for them, or you might have somebody, a child, go off and like pout, waiting for other people to go rescue them, and say, okay, we'll do what you want now because you're sad, and that leads to friendships oftentimes feeling obligated and stuff like that. So, all right, very good. So let's talk about some of the other side effects that happen from using fear, from using conditional love. Is for those of you again who are listening, let me I'm gonna show a video and you'll be able to hear that. Is there's a game called Perfection that comes from a lot of us when we were kids. There was this game called Perfection where if you put the shapes in enough time, then you win the game before it pops out and all the shapes pop out all over the place. And so that's the game, it's Perfection. And what they did in this experiment on Brain Games, one of my favorite shows, is they have two different sets of people. With one set of the people is they've got a guy who's negatively reinforcing them by telling them that they need to be faster. Well, let me show you how that sounds like here.
In there. Okay. You could do this better with my feet. I'm trying. Did you fail shapes in kindergarten? Not that one. It'd be worse if I was over here. Would that be more distracting?
You remind me of my
Would that
father.
throw you off?
Okay, so that was the negative side, and you heard the one guy said, you remind me of my father. Unfortunately, too many people have that in their minds of what their parents, is that they were always telling them that they weren't good enough, that they need to do better, and a lot of parents think that that is actually motivating. I know some that there are coaches like that, Have you seen that before in different settings?
Yeah, and unfortunately, like in some ways, our society will reward that sort of behavior because they view it as sometimes like being disciplined.
Yeah.
And it creates a subset of youth growing up that instead of being disciplined, like don't have that internal discipline themselves.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I'm not a fan of that. And I used to coach wrestling here at Rampart. I stopped when my daughter was born, but the coach I worked with is an example. Fantastic. I'll say his name because he won't care. His name was Casey Bartels. He was one of the most fantastic coaches I've ever.
I love Casey Bartels.
Yep, Casey Bartels.
Yep.
I ever worked with because he viewed sports as a way to help teach that internal discipline. And so rather than just like continually yelling or creating a sense of fear amongst his athletes, I think his athletes loved him because he taught them to do things right, just for the joy that comes from like actually doing things well and being proud of what you've done afterwards. And but I can tell you, having seen many a different coach at like, and also I teach sports
He does
broadcasting.
sports broadcasting,
Yeah.
so he sees lots of coaches.
I see lots of coaches. There's two very distinct mentalities amongst coaches, and they almost always fall under one or the other. So if you have a kid doing a sport, hopefully their coach is one of the good ones. So.
Have you seen like differences in performance levels based on these two different things you've seen at all? Or
Yeah, I mean, I've seen kids that are underneath the tutelage of a kind of a totalitarian type of
fear-based kind
fear-based
of thing.
coach that go all the way to state, and then when they win it, they don't know what to do with themselves.
Uh-huh.
And then if they don't win it, their entire view of their self is destroyed.
Yeah.
Because they put all their desire into, and don't get me wrong, the spirit of competition is actually a great motivator, but if you are judging yourself by how well you do in sports, it's a very small indicator of how you will do in the rest of life.
Yeah.
So.
And then, as you mentioned about our good friend Casey, there are a lot of coaches out there who do. I remember my coach actually from high school for cross country. He was that way as well. He was very based on inspiration. I did not fear him at all. I could always go to him when I needed to, and yet he always made me want to run harder and faster. I remember one of my favorite, the race that I actually ran. Effective than the fear-based, which let me show you the next part here, which on the perfection game, where they switch it and they have the same guy but being much more gentle and kind.
All right, you're off to a great start. You got this, no problem. You're doing great. All you gotta do is breathe. All right, don't worry, don't stress. You got plenty of time.
So when I got out of cross country, my coach's influence continued far beyond that. Whereas with the fear-based training, oftentimes that leads to negative things that oftentimes we can't get rid of. For instance, a lot of kids use fear-based on themselves when they're thinking about their achievements also. Have you ever seen that yourself?
Yeah, well, like I said, the athletes I saw or competed against, that their self-worth was determined by whether they won or lost.
Yeah.
And as soon as you lost, you're just devastated. Whereas the kids that benefit from a coach that's saying, take loss as a lesson on how to improve and be better. And honestly, that's life. That's a life skill that I think a lot of youth today lack, and I wish they would all. It's that resilience, like to quote really like totally dorky.
That's what we do.
Yeah, that's what we do. Like Batman Begins.
Yeah.
That,
When we follow Master Bruce?
Yeah. What do we do when we follow Master Bruce? And it's the people that know that a fall is merely a lesson on how to be a better person later on. You get back up.
I love that scene and that quote.
You're welcome.
Yes. So yeah, and a lot of kids grow up with that internal voice of the mean Ben here, which is that you're not good enough. You're not. Why did you do that? Why are you so stupid? And even kids who grow up with parents who aren't like that might still have that because they've learned certain perfectionistic things. So one thing I like to say to parents also is that make sure you're modeling this also for your kids. Modeling not to do that. So don't say to yourself that I'm a stupid, I'm an idiot, or call yourself names and things like that. Yeah, because the fact is they watch what we do, and
Silencio, Bruno.
I actually haven't seen that one. I still need to see that. So.
Oh, there's a character in it that is encouraging the other character to try new things. And whenever he does, whenever he sees the other kid like in his head doing that negative self-talk, he says, "You have to tell that Silencio, Bruno."
Yeah.
Which is another reason why we have the theory that Disney hates all people named Bruno. Because there's Silencio Bruno, we don't talk about Bruno.
Yeah.
There's the name of the cat in Cinderella, the jerk cat is Bruno.
Oh, I totally forgot about that cat.
Yeah, just saying.
That was a jerk cat.
Yeah, it was a jerk cat. Yeah.
Which is sad because a lot of cats are not like Bruno.
It's true. I have a cat myself.
Yes.
Not like Bruno.
Stereotypes. Anyways, we'll talk more about that in a future podcast about learning how to not be a controller to yourself. But it's important because I've talked with some people who are like, well, I'm not like that way with anybody else, but I'm just like that with yourself. Well, that's not good either. For the same reasons, what they found is the difference between the two groups with the perfection game is that most of them were successful with the guy being gentle and encouraging, where they were not successful with the guy calling them stupid behind the scenes. It just actually makes your performance worse. And so being that kind of coach, doing that to yourself, being that kind of teacher, being that kind of parent, you're actually decreasing your child's chances for success. So, which I know you've seen a lot of both, watching and seeing a lot of things. We see that as teachers too sometimes as well, is that some teachers will use a more encouraging type of thing and others use more of a fear-based type of thing. So.
And just, go back in your own head. Everyone's probably got someone that affected your life in a great way, a teacher, a mentor. Think about how they did it. In almost every case that I can think of, it was not through fear.
Oh yeah. Like, kids who are in a fear-based classroom are typically just trying to survive it rather than be changed by it. So, all right, let's take a look at a couple more things here. Whoops, already did that, so I gotta continue here. So, speaking of using fear, I wanted to show you a scene from Tangled, or listen to it, where Mother Gothel, she uses a different type of control, which is more like manipulation, okay? She doesn't use a fear inspired of herself, but she uses things like fear of the outside world and also lots of passive aggressiveness to try and...
Puppet master.
Exactly. Try and inspire fear in Rapunzel. So.
Ruffians, thugs, poison ivy, quicksand, cannibals and snakes, the plague. No! Yes, but... also large bugs, men with pointy teeth, and stop no more, you'll just upset me.
In any case here, her use of fear is not directed towards herself, but trying to make her fear the outside world. Now, why is that? Probably not good either.
You want, it's kind of our goal as teachers, is the same goal as parents. You want to raise an independent thinker that can deal with a variety of different things that life throws at them, because life is nothing but change and getting curveballs all the time,
Yes.
And if they're totally afraid, if they're paralyzed by fear of the outside world, they'll never succeed on their own. You want to have someone that can independently problem solve and think their way around different issues, and let's face it, be happy in life, and that's only going to work if they're not living in fear.
Yeah. So, for instance, I teach a living on your own class, And let me tell you, these kids are already afraid of going out and living on their own. So it doesn't help when parents are like, you'll never make it, you'll never be able to do it. And I have kids who actually tell me that they've had parents tell them that you'll never be able to make it, you don't work hard enough, you're too lazy, or you're doing all these things. And in some cases, kids might not have the skills, but you telling them that is actually going to make things worse and not actually going to help. So you have to be very careful, because we're trying to inspire them to want to do better rather than to fear them into it. I don't think that's a real word, but we'll go with it.
Yeah. Mark Twain invented words.
Yes, we're totally like Mark Twain. All right, let me show you the next scene also.
Shakespeare invented words.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Where Mother Gothel not only gets her afraid of the outside world, but afraid of her own abilities as well.
Mother knows best. Take it from your mumsy. On your own, you won't survive. Sloppy, underdressed, immature, clumsy, please. They'll eat you up alive. Gullible, naive, positively grubby, ditzy, and a bit, well, vague. Plus, I believe, getting kind of chubby. I'm just saying, 'cause I love you.
So, there's kind of a reason why Mother Gothel is one of the more hated villains in Disney.
Jerk move.
So, does that like erase all of that stuff when she says, look, I'm telling you all this stuff because I love you? Is that going to erase all the harmful things she just said?
No.
Yeah. So the thing is she's trying to tear her down, and partly is she's trying to make Rapunzel dependent on Mother Gothel so that she feels like she has to stay with her all the time. And again, our job as parents is not to get kids to be dependent on us. We want them to learn how to be independent, which means they need to learn to be confident. And telling kids that you're sloppy, you're underdressed, you're lazy, all that kind of stuff, which I hear, again, some students tell me their parents do that all the time, then they're going to get worse, not better. So I'm sure you've heard that from students from time to time.
Have. I mean,
Should we call certain people out? No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that.
No, I mean, you never know exactly, because as teachers, I mean, sure, teens exaggerate things.
Oh, yeah. They don't always, yeah.
And I kind of think to myself, like, what do my kids say about me when I'm not around? But
They say you're awesome.
I'd like to think that, but
I know as kids.
in my head, you know, they still think I'm cool. But the reality of it is, everyone comes from a different background. Everyone's got a different family life, a different perspective on things. It's just we need to do our best to not like tear our kids down, but at the same time, like, you know, encourage them to grow, because they're not going to have those skills at the beginning, and they need to get some. It only happens through learning to be independent.
Yeah, that takes some confidence. And you're right. Everybody comes from different backgrounds, and a lot of parents who do this kind of thing oftentimes grew up in households just like that. But you kind of have to come to a point where you realize, look, I grew up with this, but I don't want my kids to experience the same thing. And I've talked with a lot of parents who've made that decision. It takes a lot of extra work to change what you grew up with, but it's well worth it. Even if we all backslide from time to time. We all, I sometimes fall into using some of these things of fear, conditional love, or guilt, especially when I'm not doing well mentally myself, which we'll talk more about here in the future as well.
Oh, when she said, you know, I do this because I love you, I was like, I had a conversation with my younger one the other day.
Sorry.
You gotta learn to clean up a little after yourself. You know, you like you're chastising, but at the end, like, but I love you. And then I was like,
Yeah, like I said, we all do this kind of stuff. I've known the best of parents do this from time to time also. And telling your kids you love them after you chastise, that's not necessarily bad. I think the problem with Mother Gothel here is that she, first of all, we all know she doesn't really love her, and that she's using that as a manipulation. And the other thing is, after tearing her down so horribly, that the I love you is really almost just
an empty phrase.
An empty, very... All right, so the second clip here from Tangled, I want to talk about how not only does she use fear of the outside world, but also fear of her own abilities to try and control Rapunzel and make Rapunzel dependent upon her, which is what she's really trying to do here.
From your posy on your own, you won't survive. Sloppy on the breast, here but you're clumsy at least. Belly shoe on the line. All over my knees, closer grumpy. Did say it a bit, well, vague. Plus, I believe in energy. I'm just saying, 'cause I want you.
So that last part right there where she says, I'm just saying this because I love you. What do you think about that?
Hashtag parenting. I mean, I've fallen into that trap. I mean,
But you didn't do all those other things. So
No.
That's a big difference.
I mean, I've chastised kids, but
Yeah.
my kids, and said at the end of it, I'm doing this because I love you. I want you to, figure this out.
Yeah.
But I think I will put my motivation on the light side.
Yes.
But there's not. It's when you're trying to create dependency as opposed to teach independence. That's when you fall into that trap and you're just being manipulative.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the problem here is that she's using manipulation as a way to control. She wants her to be dependent on her because she wants to use the hair, and we know that she doesn't really love her, so that's really just a manipulation also, because that is why she feels guilty about leaving her. She wants to stay with her. All that was part of Mother Gothel's plan there to do that. But the real problems is when she was saying things to her like, you're chubby, you're vague, you're naive, basically calling her stupid and dumb. And that, I think, can have some real long-term consequences to that also. So, unfortunately, you and I have both worked with kids who really have no self-confidence. Sometimes kids have no self-confidence because of their own internal talking about themselves, as we talked about with the perfection thing. But sometimes they learn that from parents. And that's a good example of that. So, all right. So anyways, I wanted to ask you about why does this not work, getting kids to be afraid as a motivation to try and get them to work harder?
Well, it all comes back to that intrinsic, extrinsic thing. Like, you want a kid that's an independent thinker, and when something goes wrong, because, let's face it, life happens, they problem solve instead of letting something stop them because they're so afraid to mess up. When in truth, they should understand that messing up is just a lesson on how to improve yourself.
Yeah. And everybody, all kids, all adults, everybody makes mistakes. It's really just a question of whether they're going to continue on. And some kids really just don't know how to continue on. They really just, they get paralyzed, they stop. So and that's, again, that fear. Oftentimes, if I try and help them have confidence, then they can move on. Yeah.
Batman Begins.
Yes.
Yes. Bruce's dad and the voice of Alfred in Batman Begins, why do we fall, Bruce? Okay, so we get back up.
I love that quote. I love that in the soundtrack also. Sometimes I'll listen to that and be like, why do we fall, Master Bruce? So anyways, one other thing I want to mention is that I know that there's probably people listening to this thinking, oh, sure, it's all nice, well, and good to be just all kind and nicey nice all the time, but you don't know how to parent my kids because obviously, and nobody likes to be told how to parent their kids, so that's, first of all, an issue. But the fact is that it is possible to be firm and kind at the same time, which we'll get into more detail in a future podcast here, on a future video, as it is possible to do both of those at the same time. You don't have to say to a child, it's okay, you can go out in the street, I'll be here for you when you get hit. That's not going to work really well.
Hashtag parenting.
Yeah, that's that. Sometimes you got to be firm, but you can do that without using fear, obligation. One of the main reasons why you don't want to use fear as a motivator is what it does to the relationship between the child and the parent. And he kind of describes this here. This comes from a video that was done from where I graduated from the School of Education, which is Brigham Young University. They did it out of the School of Education about fear-based parenting, fear-based teaching, and I just want to show a short clip here.
But perhaps the most serious side effect, in fact, I refer to it as a toxic side effect, is that an individual who dispenses the punishment, who puts forth all those coercive things, the threats of punishment, the actual punishments, they take on, they become a stimulus for punishment themselves. And so they no longer even have to yell or threaten or be physically abusive. The mere fact they walk into the room or down the hall, they project feelings of an individual being uncomfortable. And then they want to avoid that individual.
The person who dispenses the punishment becomes somebody who the child is just afraid to be around.
Like he said, we're not perfect examples. I'm not far from perfect parent.
Totally
but,
not perfect.
As teachers, we often interact with kids, and some mention will be made of an authority figure. It could be a mentor, a parent, coach, whatever, in that kid's life, and their affect will change, like their whole face most of the time. Like, you can kind of tell that there's some fear there, and it's just kind of sad when that's the motivation, is they're too afraid of another individual to actually try something new or different or make mistakes, any of that stuff.
Yeah, I've taught a parenting class, and I asked actually a lot of the parents just recently, it was a couple weeks ago, I said, can you think of somebody that you grew up with that you were just being around them made you nervous, worried, and afraid? And most of the parents nodded their heads like, yes, definitely. I asked my students that same question. A lot of kids have somebody they're just afraid to be around. And what that does is it actually lowers your ability to influence them, which is where the real power comes from with the light side powers, right? So we'll get to the light side powers here in the future here. But the fact is your ability to influence is based on the type of trust you've got going on there. And that fear...
That's why life should have a soundtrack.
Yes.
You immediately know who the fear guy is when they walk in and the Imperial March starts.
Yes, that would be very helpful for a
That's
lot
the
of
bad
people.
guy.
Definitely would help a lot of people not get into bad relationships, that's for sure.
That's true.
So, I always wanted to have my own soundtrack, just like the guy in Emperor's New Groove, right?
Yes. Theme song guy.
So, definitely,
It's
way
all
better.
coming together.
Love that guy. Did you get your autograph with him?
I do.
Yes. All right, so let's talk about one more.
Comic-Con.
We go to Comic-Con.
Patrick
together, so-
Warburton. Anyway, I have a picture.
So in any case, one more type of manipulation is oftentimes through passive aggressiveness. And most people know somebody who's passive aggressive. Sometimes as a parent, sometimes as somebody else. Sometimes it could be your teenagers. They're really good at being passive aggressive, that's for sure.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's on the money right there.
Yeah, nobody knows how to roll their eyes better than teens, let me tell you that.
Possibly preteens.
Yeah, preteens are probably better at that, yes.
At middle school.
So the thing is that teens and kids will oftentimes try and manipulate parents also, so it can go both ways. And I had one student ask me, he said, do people know when they're manipulating? I think most of the time the answer is no. Most of the times people just do what has worked for them, and manipulation often works. I had one student who told me, Mr. Brown, I can get my friends to do anything by manipulating them. And I'm like, is that a good thing?
Dance, puppet master, dance.
See, the problem with that is that you better get used to not having friends, because eventually they're going to get tired of you. And she's like, yeah, probably. I probably need to learn how to stop that. I'm like, hopefully, yeah, because manipulators oftentimes end up friendless and alone, and then they end up blaming everybody else. Like, if they would just do what I want them to, everything would be fine. But no, that's not how it works. So passive aggressiveness is a very common type of thing. If you've ever known passive aggressive people, you don't have to call anybody out necessarily.
Yeah, Jeff.
Definitely not me. I'm going to do this silent treatment over here until you come over and apologize to me. We took a break there while I had to go over there in the corner and sulk while Patrick came over and consoled me and then agreed to do everything I wanted him to do.
That is not what happened.
All right, fine, have it your way. Gosh, just kidding. Doing more passive aggressiveness here. So let me show you another example of this with Tangled.
Welcome home, Mother.
Ah, Rapunzel, how you manage to do that every single day without fail. It looks absolutely exhausting, darling.
Oh, it's nothing.
Then I don't know why it takes so long. Oh, darling, I'm just teasing.
All right. So, Mother, as you know, tomorrow is a very
Rapunzel,
big day.
look in that mirror. You know what I see? I see a strong, confident, beautiful young lady. Oh, look, you're here too. I'm just teasing. Stop taking everything so seriously.
So it's that passive-aggressive joking is one type of passive-aggressiveness, not the only type, but it's a very common type. So therefore you can pretend like you're joking by insulting them, and then if they don't get the joke because it's not funny, then you can also insult them for not having a sense of humor. So, unfortunately...
Sorry, you just love to hate.
She's just horrible.
Yeah.
She's the worst. And I think one of the reasons why we hate these villains so much is people like, what's the one from?
Umbridge.
Umbridge and
Just
her.
love to hate Umbridge.
Is that everybody hates Umbridge like more than Voldemort, right? Because you're typically not going to come across a Voldemort very often. It's only been like twice for me. But Umbridge...
I feel like you need to fill in a story for me later.
Well, it all began years ago when I got my letter to Hogwarts. So, in any case, we're more likely to come across people like Umbridge, right? Or Mother Gothel. We probably had a teacher who's like that at some point, or a parent, or a tortoise. Master Igwe is totally like that sometimes. It drives me bonkers. No, I'm just kidding, Master Igwe. So, what? You don't have a sense of humor? What the heck? Anyways, so yeah, that's why we hate this so much, because it's not funny actually. I tell students if they joke around that way with their friends or each other, then that's just not very funny. Okay. So, you ever seen that in romantic relationships among teenagers sometimes?
Well, there's a reason most of your high school dating relationships end with a sad story. They're all like mini tragedies going on right in front of you as teachers. Like you're like, ooh, that's going to end badly. And it's just teenagers and preteens are experimenting with what it's like to be adults. And so they experiment with interacting with each other. And sometimes, especially if this has been modeled in any way for them, they'll do that. And a lot of kids try to do that humor thing, like, oh, I'm making fun of you to feel better about myself. And if you can't take it, that's your problem. And it really just ends up leaving a lot of those. Everyone's got a high school dating tragedy. I mean, that's pretty much how they all end. Because
Sounds like an interesting story.
I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you.
Did it all begin years ago?
Yeah, yep. I was.
In Hogwarts
I
also?
didn't get my letter to Hogwarts, so I left the Shire
Well, that explains a lot.
to become a Jedi like my father before me.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
You're welcome.
Excellent. All right. So in any case, as I tell my students that they're all dating somebody else's future spouse.
Oh, my dad always used to say, "Why are you spending money on someone else's future wife?" I'm still dealing with that emotional scar.
I tell my students, and they're
Thanks,
like,
Dad.
"That's just so weird." Like, well, sorry, high school relationships don't, often last. So in any case, and oftentimes again, because they have these unhealthy dating patterns, which is why I really actually like teaching these skills to teenagers, is oftentimes they have no idea that this stuff just does not lead to good stuff. So in any case, there's a lot of adults, a lot of parents who use these kind of things sometimes because they don't know what else works. Like even good parents can do these things from time to time because they just don't know how to get their kids to do stuff in a more healthy way. Like for instance, I've had students tell me that their parents tell them, well, obviously you don't love me because of the way you're acting right now. And that's a way of inducing obligation and guilt to try and get your kids to do stuff. Now, the problem is every time you use these negative emotions, fear, obligation, guilt, conditional love, all this kind of stuff, they have a negative feeling around you, and the more negative feelings they have from being around you, the less they like to be around you total, because then they associate you with negative feelings like we talked about earlier. So I don't know, did you ever know somebody from your growing up past who just induced negative feelings for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always did sports growing up. I had some great coaches, and then I had a soccer coach that was a yeller and liked to do that sort of thing. Like, if you supported the team, you'd be doing more of this and that sort of thing. Like, and I just hated playing at that particular point. I don't know. Like, I was scared to quit and scared to keep playing. And that's what's sad, because I really enjoyed soccer before that, and I enjoyed soccer after that, but there was a couple of years there where I was kind of miserable.
Yeah. And it's a lot harder to learn when we're miserable. It's harder to grow, it's harder to do all those kind of things. So the fact is, every time we use these negative emotions to try and control kids, to get them to do it, now even though we might be doing it out of a positive desire, like maybe we want what's best for them, and so we want them to work harder in school, we want them to make the right choices and stay away from bad influences. And so sometimes we use these negative emotions because they work fast. We use fear, we use conditional love, we try and get them to feel guilty, because maybe that'll keep them away from the bad things, which we want to out of love. But the fact is, we're also ruining our base of power with them overall.
Faster, quicker, more seductive is the dark side.
Exactly, which is exactly what Yoda says, right? Is that Luke asks him if the dark side is stronger. He says, well, it's faster and quicker. And it has faster, but the problem is the more you use these things, the less they work, because the less our relationship with our kids are there. So oftentimes I'll have parents who are like, I yell at my kids all the time and they never hear me. I'm like, well, that's why they don't hear you. So the more you yell, the more you use fear, the more you use guilt, the more you have to like up it, and they start to become immune to it. And the fact is you're actually lessening your power over time, until eventually, as we talked about earlier, kids who only have extrinsic motivation
Go off the deep end,
they go a little bit
decision-wise.
crazy. Yes. So we want our kids to have intrinsic motivation. So the thing is, we're going to talk more about how to use intrinsic motivation in a future podcast. We'll stop here. But the fact is, when you are using trust and unconditional love, you can still be firm at the same time. We're not coddling kids. We're not going to make it too easy. We're not pleasing them, people pleasing them. All that stuff doesn't work either. We're not going on the one end super authoritarian and Darth Vader-ish, where on the other end is we're trying to be their best friend. It's neither of those. We got to find using trust and unconditional love in a way that is effective and good, which is what we're going to be talking about. So thank you very much for coming on the show here. Thanks everybody for attending Jeff Brown's classroom here, and Master Uguay would come and say goodbye, except for I think I hurt his feelings when I was using him as an example for being passive-aggressive. So,
Fear.
yes. That's why you should not be using that, because tortoises are very sensitive.